Okay, well, g'day. Flat Earth Aussie Jesus here, otherwise known as Ross Thatcher, coming to you with another part in the Thatcher's Law of Perspective series, which I'm going to have to explain quite a few things. It seems as though I've been challenged on many levels, which is great. I love a good challenge. But the biggest thing people are having a lot of trouble with is perspective. And I'm constantly having to explain the same things over and over again. I think we'll start with something simple, just as a little mental exercise to help you get started, which is to re-explain Thatcher's Law of Perspective. It's a very simple thing. Yes, I named it after myself because, well, I have Thatcher's hands. Thatchers are notoriously known as people that make thatched roofs. So I guess somewhere along my ancestry we were roofers. So, not roofies. So Thatcher's Law of Perspective is simply to build your steeple. Just put your hands together like so in front of you and look down. It is so simple. You might even have to lift it up a little bit and your little fingers will start to look as though they're pointing up like that, as I've explained in every single other one of Thatcher's Law of Perspective. This is the simple one for children to understand. When you're looking down at it, you see your little finger rising up, little fingers rising up to midway in eye level. Bring it up to eye level, and what do you know? They're flat and level. They're on the flat and level, as the Freemasonic symbol says. The Freemasonic symbol even looks just like that. Set square at the bottom, the all-seeing eye pyramid at the top. That is the sun's path. The sun is the all-seeing eye. The set square is where the sun sets, according to your perspective, at the bottom. You are always on the level. The illusion of parallel lines high above you, as you can see just by looking into the corner of your room, you'll see the corner of your ceiling appearing to go downwards. You'll see the corner of your floor appearing to rise upwards. Eventually, down a very long hallway, they will reach a point. In fact, I have a picture here. I'm going to try and do this. Yes, I'm very, very amateur at making videos, I understand. So you will have to bear with me. And of course my laptop is very, very slow, so I didn't prepare anything earlier, so I can't really say, here's one I prepared earlier. As much as I would have liked to, that would have been pretty cool. I'll just open up my perspective videos images folder, and we'll find you one here, this one here. And quite often the first one doesn't open up, so while we're waiting we'll just have a quick. Is it going to work? That is the question. This is the big mystery, we never know. It may or may not work. Everything converges towards the centre, is the basic understanding law of perspective. The higher your ceiling may be, the steeper the angle it will appear to come down, which is why the sun, being as high as it is, does this sort of angle while going in a perspective line, in a parallel line. You're at the bottom, looking up at it as it approaches. Whoa, look how high it is. Oh, look how low it is. Oh, it's setting behind the set square. It's all perspective, 100%. Okay, so, here's the first one come up. I don't know if it even gets any bigger. No. We can. Let's just try and see how this works. This is going to be very, very amateur, so bear with me. Don't know if you can actually read that, but you can see. I'll read it for you, because it says, you're talking about perspective, you mean you argue with flat earthers every day and you're this clueless? Figures. 1,212 pillars meet in one dot, built by legendary Indian engineers 1740 years ago at Rameshvaram, let me say it right, Rameshvaram temple. Oh, that always happens. There's always something to go wrong. Let me just pick that back up because that is my power source. And we're back in business. Rightio. So that's the first law of perspective, is everything shrinks to a dot, coming to the centre from all directions. Every direction. They're all coming to that one dot. Now the thing is, because we live on this low surface to the ground, that most of the time we're so used to seeing the majority of things on our ground level and not realising that these really high things like the sun and moon don't take a much different sort of path from what we're used to seeing things just on ground level. On ground level, we're just used to seeing things slowly disappear in the distance without even taking the time to stop and think that they are actually rising up to eye level. The horizon always rises up to eye level. This is very hard to show on a diagram, especially looking side on, because side on you don't see that. You only see it from a viewer's eye perspective, not from viewer looking at viewer eye perspective. So I'm not even sure if this is a good example. Let's take a quick squeeze at this and see if I don't knock everything over again. If I turn the screen slightly. This one here shows how it appears. Oh well, what the? It won't do that if I wanted it to. You gotta love technology, don't you? Ah, far out. Let's find a better one. I'm sure this one's... No, that's the same one. Let's look at this one. Let's look at this one for an example. Why doesn't the camera want to point towards it? There we go. In this one you can see the viewer's eye level goes to that same point, but each one of these lines converges down towards the same obscurity point, which is what causes the sun to set. This is just normal, natural, logical observation once you grasp some sense of perspective. It's the most simple thing, really, and yet everybody wants to obscure it in some bizarre misunderstanding and call it curvature. And yet I've shown multiple examples, not on my own channel necessarily. Julian Spective is one I strongly recommend, because I've just taken a series of different pictures where there was one opportunity I had to actually edit things together so you can see from multiple different videos. And when you look at Julian rocks sitting on the horizon from water level at Byron Bay, it is 100% above the water level. As you raise in elevation, all of a sudden it's surrounded by miles and miles and miles and miles of perfectly flat, level water. Now if it's curvature, it doesn't just vanish like that. You can see that in any example. You go and look at a hill. If you climb up another mountain and look down at that hill, you'll still see that hill has curvature. You go to a baseball game, there's a pitcher's mound. The pitcher's mound has obvious curvature, while the rest of the field is level. So why in God's name would this curvature on ocean disappear just because you get higher up and get a better vantage point to see above your obscurity point? Where is that curvature gone again? Why is it invisible? Why can you go all the way to Cape Byron and look around 180 degrees for over 100 miles in my estimation and not even see so much as an inch of curvature left to right? And yet somehow, because the people deluded in their heads thinking that it's curvature obscuring something in the distance on the horizon is causing it, hello, you're not really thinking very clearly at all. Now I was going to draw some diagrams I'm not even sure if that's necessary now. There were so many things. Okay, where to start? Where to start? Perspective, I think we've covered the basics of how that works. There is a point in front of you on your low ground level which will obscure things much nearer than the things which are really high, which are visible for miles and miles, thousands of miles further. The sun, the stars, the other things, before they're obscured by this nearby point. But this nearby point always rises to eye level. It's just a simple matter of perspective. Perspective is your eyes. Your eyes are the focal point that creates what you are personally seeing. Your horizon is personal to you. A person in a plane directly above you will see a horizon many miles further away. So horizon is not a real tangible thing. It is an illusion caused by the limits of your height. In some cases, like them, I look out my back window, my horizon is caused by a back fence. Is that an horizon? Well, no, because you say, well, you're just going to look over your fence. And then all of a sudden, I can see 20, 30 miles over into the distance over there towards the coast. But on a cloudy day like today, I can't see nearly so far. There's all sorts of things affecting your distance range of view. But there are limitations based on... Now this is the one that somebody's been giving me a hard time on. So I'm going to basically sit down and have a talk about it for a bit. The one is called angular resolution. Come and get a bit closer. Angular resolution. Now there seems to be a lot of confusion over what angular resolution means. You've got angular resolution, spatial resolution, linear resolution. There's so many different types of resolution that we need to come to some sort of consensus as to what they mean. So I'm going to put it into my basic definitions and we'll see where we go from there. Angular resolution is that caused by viewing height across the angle. So, the basic understanding of angular resolution is for every 1 millimetre of height, you can see 3,000 millimetres across. Now that's obviously not true. I basically worked that off from the 6 feet being able to see 3 miles. It's not a very good explanation as I understand of it now. 6 feet to 3 miles is about accurate, but 12 feet doesn't mean you see 6 miles, and nor does 1 millimetre mean you'll see 3 metres, although it's possible if your eyes were able to be 1 millimetre above the ground. It's possible, I suppose. Might be able to see 3 metres. It's probably not a good example. Maybe if we went 10 centimetres to 30 metres. Maybe that's a bit more reasonable. I don't think so. I think it's less than that. It's probably more 1 in 2,500. But the point is, let's not get bogged down in numbers. You can lose yourself in numbers, spending forever trying to work out silly mathematical things that are irrelevant. We don't really need to know precisely until we really need to know precisely. What we know is there's an angular resolution caused by our height, and then at a certain point, because perspective says the floor always comes up, the ceiling always goes down, the sides always come in, everything converges to the midpoint, that there's a limit to how far we can see. Hang on a second. This crusty old one. So we'll call that one angular resolution. Spatial resolution therefore becomes the distance. So the further something goes across on the plane, which is the distance, it diminishes. We call it distance diminution. So it shrinks basically as it gets further away, which is why, we know the moon's big, but you put your thumb up in front of it, you block the moon, because distance diminution has made it look really tiny, but it makes your thumb look really big. So that's pretty much about the only place where relativity seems to become relevant towards anything that we can apply. You can say relative speed as well. Somebody did make a comment I saw just today, which I never really thought about it like that before either. But he says relative means if you move your hand across like that, you can move it. It's moving relatively fast compared to, say, a speeding car going down a track 50 metres away or 100 metres away, and the car's going, it's going like 100 k's an hour or 150 k's an hour or whatever, but your hand is just going really slow. That essentially is relativity. Relativity has to do with perspective. It has nothing to do with this other concept which says that two trains sitting at a station, or one's at the station sitting still, another train goes whizzing by it, the example I used, I'll stick to it, 40 miles per hour, means that relative to each other they're going 20 miles per hour. Now that is only true technically, but in reality the train moving past at 40 miles per hour is moving past at 40 miles per hour. The train standing still is standing still. So it's the same thing really with this whole hand concept. Your hand is still only moving, I don't know, 5 miles per hour. But perspective changes everything. That means it's not even going as fast to your perspective as the car going 150 kilometres per hour. Now going back and forth between kilometres and miles, this is something we Aussies have to deal with all the time, so you'll have to deal with it too. Kilometres, miles, doesn't really matter. There's 5 miles to 8 kilometres is the basic estimation, if you must know, so do what you will with that. So the point is, things to do with relativity do have some thing to do with reality as we view it, if you put it into perspective. So perspective is everything. Everything in science that everybody keeps coming back at me with, that's not scientific, show me the science law, show me the references, where's the citation? Well, everything in science just uses perspective. That's what they use measuring devices to get some perspective as to how fast it is actually going, or how long it is, how distant, how big, how heavy, all the rest. It's all done because you can perceive it. If you can't perceive it, a blind man doing observational science isn't going to have a really good time at it, because he sort of lacks that kind of perspective that we use to apply to understanding the world that we see. He can feel the world, and he might have a great depth perception from his ears. He may have exceptional hearing range and not even really need eyesight to get around as much as the person who uses it as his main tool to understand the world he's looking at. But if we're using it as our main tool to look at the world as we see it, then we have to try and use some amount of logic and reason to interpret the sensations that we're viewing. And that's the trouble, is most people simply say that if something's obscured by something in front of you, because they're so caught up in the idea that we live on a globe, they will say that it's curvature. And as I said already, gain a bit of elevation, where's the curvature gone? It was never there to begin with. It is a matter of perspective, and so therefore you need to use a logical mind to try and interpret it and then sort out how it works. The next biggest thing that a lot of people don't understand, obviously, is the sunset, which I think I've already told you the basics of it with that. The Freemasonic symbol, they're obviously very wise people. What you don't realise is that nearly all of the greatest cultures that have come and gone in the past, most of which you've probably never even heard of before, there have been thousands, millions of them. We've seen remnants of them in the ruins of Egypt. This stuff goes back for millions and millions of years. Time never was that man wasn't. You can quote me on that. It's always been going on. And we've always been sun worshippers. That's pretty much nature worship. The sun is the giver of life. All life, energy, comes from the sun. All our crops grow because of the sun. All our seasons are caused by the sun. It makes sense that we would pay homage to the sun. Yes, that means you may all drink. Now the sun has always been, therefore, regarded as the Son of God. It's funny how the word sun sounds exactly like the word sun. Sun, son. But we never say son, do we? Son. No, we just say sun. So you can see how we've lost a lot of knowledge basically through language as well. I think languages have been slowly dumbed down more and more and more as much as we've lost our history, we've lost our knowledge, we've lost our technology, we've lost so much that we've had, and it's all by deliberate design, which is pretty much why now we have this resurgence of knowledge. Now the first thing I think we really need to understand is what is the flat Earth. Now I don't use the term flat Earth very often. I use it for simplicity. But my greatest understanding of what is the flat Earth is it's a planar Earth. Flat Earth is ridiculous when you think about it. You know, we've got mountains, valleys, gorges, we've got all sorts of beautiful land formations, cliffs, the whole lot. So to say flat, it kind of defeats the purpose in a way. It's a planar Earth. The way we think of it is the water is level, the Earth is all the measurably higher parts above sea level. So therefore, the living Mother Earth is all at which is above water level. Water never curves, it always seeks its level, it always fills its container, and if it's got more levels to go to, it flows away. So on the flat planar Earth, we obviously have to think of it then as the infinite planar Earth. Now there is the Antarctic ice ring around us. Let's just, for people who've never come across flat Earth before, explain the basic model. Antarctica is an ice ring right around the southern perimeter. It's further than we can really realistically ever even sail to for practical purposes. Yes, you can go there. Yes, it's expensive. But for the common person, it's just out of our leagues altogether. You know, you need the funding of the British Royal Navy and a fleet of ships or something like that to seriously consider doing it, as Captain Cook did a few hundred years ago, 200. The Earth model is based around the azimuthal equidistant map, which is the closest we've got to a working map. Magnetic north, true north, is the absolute centre of the world. Directly above it is Polaris. Polaris is the fixed star around which all the other stars rotate. They all rotate around it. I'll have to really look into that again. I've forgotten. I would have thought circles go clockwise. Or do they go counterclockwise? Yeah, well, at this stage it's not important. We'll go into the star trails on another occasion. The point is, they appear to go in a different direction from the other side of the equator because we're looking in a different direction. They're still going the same direction, but when you're looking the other way, instead of going right to left when you look at it that way, going left to right that way, or vice versa. The actual direction is besides the point at this time. I have a feeling it's clockwise, the same way the sun goes. So that's the Earth basically is potentially infinite with multiple other continents beyond Antarctica. In fact, I'll pull up a quick map for that since I'm so good at doing visual aids and stuff. Yeah, that was a bit sarcastic. I did see one just a second ago. Just to give you a little glimpse. Oh, no, it'll take me forever to find it there. Let's just click on that one and this one. This one was in the Hawaiian Gazette. You can look it up. Was the world map made 10 centuries ago. And it's that one there. You've possibly all seen it. I can't even read it because the writing's really small on that one, but it's from the Hawaiian Gazette. Friday, January 11, 1907, I think. I wonder if I can zoom on this one and actually mean to do it. Wow. Sort of. Yeah, 1907. Oh, I've got good eyes. So, here's a little quick demonstration to help you get a visualization of how the sun works. Now, bear this in mind. I will expand on this. Take a quick screen grab. Okay. So, that is how it appears to us. But once again, you have to bear in mind a little thing called perspective. And this is what I was gonna actually get out a marker pen and a whiteboard and draw some visual aids for you to help. But I think when it comes down to it, I'll just explain it. It's such easier. Such easier. So, basically, as we've described, when things get further away from you, they appear to shrink. And then, say for example, you fired off a rocket away from you. It was able to go in, and it spiraled in a circle. As it went away from you in the same size circle, those circles would appear to get smaller and smaller and smaller as it diminished into the distance. That makes sense, right? Well, what we fail to understand, because we're so used to looking at things just on the flattened level, is it does the same thing when you're looking up. A very simple way to explain that is to go to a very tall building, walk up to it, and you put your feet at the base, or maybe stand back a couple of meters, and look up at the top floor. Train your neck to look up at the top floor. Walk a few blocks away and look back at it, and all of a sudden, oh, there's the top floor just there. It's not so tall after all. A few more blocks further away, it's almost at eye level. This is what distance does to tall things. It makes them appear a lot lower. So it's the same thing with the sun. And the way the seasons work now. I'm going to have to explain the seasons. So this may take a little while the sun travels in a path called, well, it's called the sun alemma actually, an alemma. And I do have a version of that on this as well. Hopefully that won't take too long to find. Oh, beauty, right there. Okay, so maybe we can have a quick look at that. I just want to make sure I go with you so that the screen isn't too distorted. See how it moves in the analemma, the figure 8, as it goes up and down. Hopefully you're able to pause it there so you could take a good look and good read. But this is why, as it says, in the northern hemisphere we get longer, warmer days in the summer, colder, shorter days in the winter. So, let me explain. The sun analemma maps the path of the sun throughout the year. As you saw, it's a figure 8. It's an infinite figure 8. This is why I like to get out the whiteboard so I could draw it for you, because this is one of the things I used to doodle constantly, like on the covers of my school books and stuff. I was always bored at school because I'd always be finished my work before everybody else and had nothing else to do, so I'd draw pictures and start writing and whatever. But doodling this particular image of the sun analemma, I never really understood it at the time, but now I do. It's an infinite figure, the infinite figure 8. And let me explain it for you. The very top point is June 21 or 22, depending on the year. That varies from year to year, but that's the time when the sun is highest and furthest away from us. That's the winter solstice for us here in the outer perimeter of the equator. The outer hemisphere, as it's often called in the global system. Or, sorry, southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, or the inner side of the equator, that is the summer solstice. And that's their longest day of the year. Now, as I said, this is going to take a while to explain because I need to drink a bit of beer with this. It's Sunday after all. Because the sun is furthest from us, it appears, just like that rocket travelling away from us, to go in smaller and smaller circles. And yet there's always still precisely 24 hours in each and every circle. Well, that's what we've measured it as over the millennia, so that's what we call it. It's basically a day. It always comes back to the same place. It's always overhead at midday, because that's what we've observed. If we were... I won't try and negate the globe at this point. I just get sidetracked. This is how we've observed it. You use a sundial. That's where our first clocks came from. As long as the clocks matched the sundial, we knew that they were working. So the sun is always overhead at midday because it always takes 24 hours to make a circuit, a complete circuit. And as it gets higher and higher and further away, it appears to make a smaller and smaller circle, which is why the northern centre then gets this like 24-hour sun in certain places, because it's so high up it never really sets. But here in the far south we see the sun far to the north. It rises late, it sets early. It's quite cold because the sun is not only further away from us, it's also shining all its direct light into the northern centre. So the northern centre gets its summer, but they don't have as long, hot or nearly severe a summer as we have, but they have a summer season because the direct light is still direct light, shining through the same amount of atmosphere. The atmosphere over the entire plane is the same height. Now this is very important. The atmosphere is the most important factor that most people haven't taken into consideration, and that is why there is so much confusion as to the size of the sun, how far away it is, and all the rest. We'll get to that in a minute. We're still just explaining the seasons. So the seasons then, when the sun peaks on June 22nd and then starts spiralling back down again, this then gives the appearance of it's starting to move back southwards. And then when it reaches the equinox on, what is it, June, July, August, September 22nd, roughly, it's probably written there actually, September 22nd, we'll just average it out here, call it all the 22nd. That's when the NLMA, the crossover point, that's when it's coming back down and crosses over again at the X marks the spot. That's why they're called equinoxes, because they're the equidistant points where the sun, always going around the equator every single day, is now at the equidistant point, so we get the equinox. And that's why on that NLMA, as you saw, the circle at the top half towards the bigger half, it's always bigger at the bottom, smaller at the top. It's still the same size, same distance, but it appears smaller because it's further away. Logical, obvious, once you understand perspective. Everything is perspective. So the smaller circle of the figure 8, figure 8s are often traditionally drawn too, mind you, the smaller circle's always at the top, is because it's in the northern centre, further away from us, and then it begins its descent. So once it reaches past that equinox, it starts to get warmer and warmer down towards the south, until eventually it reaches December 22nd, when it's at the lowest point, and that's where we have our summer solstice, and you guys have your winter solstice. And we can see this in traditional sun worship if we decide to look into it. Yes, I've explained it multiple times before, but a lot of you are new to this, so I'll explain it one more time for people who haven't seen this yet. Is that the people in the far north, they get a bit concerned because the sun goes so far south for them that it actually disappears and they go into like eternal darkness. And it's a little bit worrying because they say, where's the sun gone? The sun is dead. The sun has died. And so a lot of these ancient seers, what they would do is they'd prepare some of these special mushrooms called the fly agaric, or I saw another name for them today too that gored me on me already. But those red mushrooms with the white spots. What they would do, because they only grow under certain pine trees, is that they'd pluck them out, and over years of experience, they'd hang them up to dry, probably on a piece of hair or something. Who would know? They'd hang them up under the snow-covered pine boughs and light some tallow candles beneath them to help them dry out. And for a weary traveller going through such a dark, dreary place, they'd see these beautiful trees all glistening and glowing with shiny baubles hanging from them, and they'd say, oh, what is this? And of course these people were merry people and they'd been preparing for this, and they'd say, oh yes, come in and have some mulled wine and have some food to drink, because, well, food to eat, because they'd be preserving, you know, whatever they had left from the harvest, you know, some dried preserved cabbage or some root vegetables stored down in the underground cellar or whatever it was they had. And they'd make merry and they'd exchange gifts, because that's what strangers always do, exchange gifts when they meet one another. And so what they'd find then on this day on the winter solstice, that the sun went so far below the horizon that they'd say, the sun has died, the Son of God has died. And they'd go on this mushroom journey then, and they'd astral travel and go to the stars and see where the sun has gone. And when they'd go far enough south, they'd see the Southern Cross in the sky, and they'd say, oh, the Son of God has died on the cross. And then when they'd return back from their journey 3 days later, they'd tell these fantastic tales. Oh, the Son of God has died on the cross and has descended into the underworld. But then on the morning of the 25th, they can see the Son of God on the horizon again, and they say, the Son of God has risen again. He has come again. Give us eternal life. And so they would celebrate the birth of the Son of God every December 25th. And to this day, we still carry on that tradition of using pine trees and hanging fancy baubles and lights off them to make them look all pretty and exchange presents. This tradition has never changed, never altered. It's all to do with sun worship. Of course, here in the south, it's kind of meaningless because we're just laying out here in the stinking hot sun and going, oh bloody hell, I wish this sun would bugger off. It's so bloody hot. Because the sun is much, much closer to the earth, to the point of December 22nd, which is why, Australia is a sunburnt country. Africa doesn't do that much better. South America fares a little bit better because it's a bit more tropical. But all the southern continents, until you go really far south, like maybe New Zealand and maybe the tip of South America, what you notice is that the natural people who lived and grown there for years and years, their natural skin colours don't do what they do in the far north. What you notice is in the far north, natural skin tones are quite pale. That's where us white-skinned people originated from. As you get closer and closer to the equator, skin colours get naturally darker and hair gets naturally darker. You get beyond the equator, they get darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. They've never bothered to go back lighter again like you'd expect on a globe if the seasons were tilted by that. I mean, fair enough, in the globe model, what they say is that the sun is a further 3 million miles away while the north is in summer. But that's easily explained by the simple matter of understanding that you're on a planar Earth and this 3 million mile apparition. See, this is what most mathematicians and what's the other one? Geometricians? People that do geometry. Mathematicians. Let's just call them that. They fail to comprehend is that they're looking at everything on 2D paper without taking into this factor of distance diminution. So a thing further away, using triangulation to calculate it, forgets to take in distance diminution. Now if you did it on the ground on a flat surface, it'll work perfectly. You can do distance A to B, both of you look at distance C, triangulate it, bam, you've got a direct distance to distance C. But when you're looking up, you're forgetting that what appears to be distance C could be 1,000 miles further away, but you're going to calculate it as 10,000 miles further away because you've forgotten to take into realization distance diminution. Because you know the size of the thing on the ground, that's not really a problem. But you don't know the size of the thing in the sky, whether it be the sun, the moon, or whatever. You cannot triangulate the distance of something in the sky unless you know its actual size. And we don't know its actual size because we can't go up there. The next thing now I'm going to go into, hopefully I've explained the seasons pretty well for you. That the sun, when it's in the south, appears to be in the south. Still always going around the equator. As it travels back up again, goes back into our autumnal equinox, your spring equinox, Easter, and so on infinitely, year by year by year. The next one I think that we really have to hit upon. I know everybody's dying for me to talk about the moon and the giants making the moon. That one is just a theory. It's a best working theory. I'd rather talk about the sun for now. To me, the sun is far, far, far more important because the sun, being the giver of life, as opposed to this trickster of the moon that sends people into lunacy, what we don't really understand is what is the sun? how does light work. And that is why I said that is why I said earlier that the atmosphere is the most important factor to be taken into account when we're trying to understand the sun, why it appears to go 15 degrees angular per hour, 15 degrees per hour across the sky, with no difference in the angular size of sun. I don't really like angular size because, as I said before, angular resolution is to do with distance and height. Angular size, angular resolution, no, I think we should call it, well, it's not linear resolution. What was the other one? I think we should just call it resolution. You know, if you took a picture of it, how much resolution, how many pixels per image compared to other pixels per image taken from the same you know, lens. Not thinking of all my good words here because it wasn't what was going to come into the equation. Is it aperture? Anyway, focal length. Using the same focal length on a camera all day, take a picture of the sun at sunrise, every hour on the hour, throughout the day, till sunset. And people are claiming, like I've never done this myself, but people claim they've done it. I don't actually believe them because the few who I have seen do it actually dispute their claim, and say it does change slightly, but they say it doesn't. They say that the size of the sun all throughout the day remains the same, especially if you use a solar filter. So I would like to explain why I think that happens. Now, as I said with all my theories, I don't claim they're all 100% true. I just claim them as my best truth, which I think you should test for yourself and look into it and investigate. If you think it's wrong, by all means, prove me wrong. But when a person puts forth the best hypothesis that they've spent years investigating, then, you know, you can either take my word for it, or at least file it into your book of knowledge. That's what I always call my mind, you know, it's my book of knowledge. I file things away into it. I don't necessarily believe them. I don't necessarily state anything as true. You know, in fact, I would probably say all is illusion. But you know, at the same time, we have to come up with some best theory. So, best theory, for me, says the sun is an apparition. It does not even exist until it and the atmosphere and us form a three-way relationship. It becomes visible to us because of the atmosphere between us. Okay, so I mean that makes sense even on a globe. You're always going to see the sun through the atmosphere. Now I've got another video on my perspective videos list. I'm not sure what it's called exactly. I will try and find it actually and link it at the end of this, which is this one that discusses how light itself does not even exist until it reaches a certain point in the atmosphere, which we know as the noble gases. And this video shows excellent examples of how using a Tesla coil and different tubes filled with noble gases, you know, they don't glow at all, but as you bring it near to the Tesla coil, they start to glow. And I think it was argon, I'm not sure the names aren't really relevant. There are various noble gases in the atmosphere, and they glow in the presence of the sun. So the sun is kind of like a Tesla coil. I'm not saying it is a Tesla coil, okay, so do not ever misquote me on that. I'm saying it has similar properties in some manner. I know I've gone into some pretty far out explanations of what I think the sun actually is in the past, but I'll leave that out of this particular one. All we have to understand is that some sort of electromagnetic radiation or force comes from what I call this black hole portal. Now, I call it not in the sense of a black hole that sucks in light and can never escape, not that sort of black hole at all. Just a portal, a sphere of nothingness in physicality that exists, that creates a force so powerful that all the gases illuminate within its presence. And then because we are down low looking up through all the atmosphere, this then creates to us an illusion of a very bright white or shiny golden ball of light. We can't even look at it in the midday sun at all, of course, but as the sun recedes into the distance, then we can start to see it through more and more atmosphere, and we can look at it more clearly, and then we see that the noble gases between us and it start to grow a lot dimmer and start to go into different colours, different shades, your reds, oranges, pinks, purples, greens. I've seen all sorts of shades coming from the noble gases in various layers of the atmosphere. So the sun is illuminating the atmosphere. It's not a ball of light shedding light 360 degrees. It's shedding the same energy 360 degrees, but it's only as it reaches the atmosphere itself that it begins to cause these gases to glow, which then of course causes what we call daylight, which is why in a room like this there's absolutely no direct sunlight whatsoever, and yet there's these tiny windows up there allowing a small amount of sunlight to come in, creating daylight. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a bit of a glow there most of this video, and I've got the camera pointing away from it. So the apparition of the sun is unique to every viewer and unique from every perspective. So as we're seeing it appearing to set due to getting further and further away, where we're seeing it through more and more and more atmosphere before this ground level coming up between us starts to obscure it, we see different shades in the sky, and then when it has been obscured by these things down on our ground level, we can still see on the far opposite horizon the clouds still appearing to glow and be illuminated by the sun, even lit underneath. And people think, oh, well, it's lit underneath, that proves it's a globe. Because, I'm sorry, but that doesn't actually make sense at all. If it were a globe, the globe would be twisting away from the sun to the point where we saw it set. This part on the other side behind us, it would have set on that well before. And that couple of 100 metres or miles, whatever you want to call it, where the clouds are, would be insufficient to overcome this 1,000-mile spin, causing the sun to set that many miles away the other way. But because as the sun is now getting sufficiently far enough away that it gets obscured by the horizon, the atmosphere stops glowing so much, it glows less and less, you get a nice twilight. It's very pretty. It does highlight the bottoms of clouds simply because the same noble gases are still being electrostimulated by this force of whatever this sun actually is that causes our atmosphere to glow for at least half the day. Then as it goes further away, of course, then it's starting to illuminate more directly upon other parts of the planar Earth. So the sun works as like the hour of a 24-hour clock hand. Wherever it's directly above is 12 midday noon. And it just keeps going around and around. So when it's directly opposite, that's our 12 midnight. That's why it's completely dark. We can see the stars. It comes back around again, and 6 o'clock in the morning we start to see the glow starting to show again. It gets nearer and nearer. Glow, 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 and all of a sudden, well, we can see the apparition of the sun again. So I think this is well worth bearing in mind, because now I will have to go into the moon. The moon is not self-illuminating. So sorry to all you flat earthers who keep saying this same thing over and over again. It's really not a very intelligent stance to take to try and declare the moon is self-illuminating when you've got no idea how it self-illuminates. You've got no reason to explain why it would have phases. You come up with ideas that maybe it's charged by the sun. Why not just simply accept the fact that it's illuminated by the sun? It makes a lot more sense over the flat, stationary planet Earth if we understand what the moon is. So let's briefly look at my latest theory as to what I think it is. I've always said it's some sort of artificial construct. I've always said that. I've maintained that for years and years and years. After watching the documentary called There Are No Forests on the Flat Earth by Mr. Russian Man, whoever your name is, I appreciate the time and effort you put into making that documentary. It blew my mind and changed my whole perspective and opened it to a lot of other things in history, which is why I've recently read the book called Secret of the Ages. You can find that in 3 parts on my channel. I strongly recommend anybody interested in this topic listen to at least the first 2 parts, and the 3rd part, it's worth a listen to as well. Just there's some interesting things in that. But the first 2 parts do go into a lot of things about our ancient days, our lost history, multiple destructions, thousands of years of war and destruction by very nasty beings, possibly bioengineered, including great giants. Which is why, after I put 2 and 2 together, I may have had a few beers one night and thought, that makes too much sense. Maybe it doesn't. But at this stage, it makes a lot of sense, because I'm thinking, okay, if the Grand Canyon is a great strip mine, our scientists today think the moon came from the Earth from a great collision, yet the moon appears to be a great, perfect spherical object. And, I don't know, everybody keeps talking about this thing called gravity, that gravity is what attracts things. So if the moon is just a great giant rock that formed into a sphere, and it's held to us by gravity, well, every example I've ever seen before of gravity says that things get attracted. I used to play with magnets quite a bit as a kid. I love playing with magnets, and they just go clunk and stick together, and put them apart again if you wanted to get them apart. That's attraction of mass. Magnetism. Gravity, complete and utter bullshit. You've got density and buoyancy. I've explained it multiple times. Everybody keeps wanting to ask, why is down, down? Why, if air is less dense, why doesn't it go up? Why doesn't it go left or right? It is so simple. Drives me to drink. Density and buoyancy. No forces. Okay? The only force that's ever applied is that which moves an object from its place in the first place, like picking it up. If you left it alone, the object at rest stays at rest. Simple as that. Things that fall through the air fall through the medium of air at the same rate because we disturb them. If we didn't disturb them, they'd stay at rest. But everything falls at the same rate because they're falling through the same medium. The only difference is air resistance. a feather might have some air resistance, so it falls a bit slower. But everything drops and falls at the same rate through the medium of air because of density and buoyancy. So something that's more dense than the medium it's in won't find buoyancy until it reaches a place of more density where it becomes buoyant. That's how it works. It does not go up to a place of less density, because a place of less density has less buoyancy to offer. So all you idiots that keep asking that same question over and over again, it's got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And you call yourselves educated people. I'm really sorry that you ask such stupid questions. So therefore then the moon, to become buoyant so high up in the sky, tells me it must be full of some sort of medium such as helium or hydrogen perhaps. Hydrogen to me not so much, because it's highly flammable, and when you're building something out of molten lava, then it's not really ideal to fill it full of hydrogen unless you've prefabricated the inner structure full of supports, of course. I haven't sort of thought this through all that much for these people that really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of what it is, but of course it would be full of inner supports, full of all sorts of things. I mean, maybe it's a huge giant spy watchtower type of thing, teeming with who knows what sorts of beings, whether they be physical or aphysical. The point is, whatever it's made out of, some sort of honeycomb structure, if it was made with molten glass on the outside surface of it, there's still no reason why it couldn't be filled with hydrogen if all measures were taken into place to I don't know exactly how they built it. I mean, it's a massive structure. It would make a great thing to actually sit down and talk about for a week with some really learned people and say, how would we build a moon if we had giant beings at our disposal who are able to make absolute, lakes full of molten lava, and some sort of big device to put it on a spindle to roll it into a ball and get it out into space, upper atmosphere. It's not something that I've really given that much thought to. I'm just saying that hypothetically, that would be one potential for where the moon came from. It came from Earth, out of materials that was superheated into basically lava from beings beyond our imagination. As I mentioned in one comment, imagine 100. Maybe 100 is underestimating. Maybe there's 1,000. 120-foot tall giants. Maybe there's 10,000. We don't know. We don't know what sort of things they've done to our Earth in the past that have left it these ruins that we are now living upon. All I'm saying is that anything is possible, and you're only limited by your imagination if you really have to be limited by anything at all. That's not very scientific. No, it's not. But if we're trying to imagine what could possibly put the moon up there, and we look at the craters and we realise that the craters resemble more like something that form on the surface of a hot mud spring or something as they pop and as they slowly settle. Well, if it's made out of something like molten glass or lava type of stuff, that would kind of make a bit more sense to me, in my mind, as to why all the craters are perfectly spherical. They're not that deep, but they do still create shadows as the sun hits upon them at an angle during our half-moon phases. So, without any further diversions from how it got there, the thing is, the moon is there, and what it does do is it goes around above us once per day plus 50 minutes. So it takes almost an entire hour longer than the sun to go around us. And so this is how we get the phases. The full moon phase is the very night, the only night it shines all night long. of the entire month, which is when, to our perspective, it rises, comes into view at the same time the sun appears to set, as they're going in their big, massive dance around above us, above the flat, stationary, planar Earth. This is, I'll tell you in a second. This is why I think that the moon is something glass-like, something semi-opaque or semi-translucent, is because the sun, as far as I can tell, now things have just changed in the last couple of days, but as far as I could tell, the sun was above the moon. Now that our top scientists have suddenly started telling us, headlines are popping out everywhere, that the moon is still within our atmosphere, that sort of changes the ball game once again. So of course, like with all my ideas, they have to be constantly evolving and adapting and adjusting to all the latest information that comes to hand, and then I have to apply it, think about it for a few days, and apply my intuition towards it, and say, well, I previously was thinking, if the sun's light doesn't even exist until it hits our atmosphere, and yet I was still trying to say at the same time that the sun's light causes the moon to illuminate because it's above the atmosphere. I've sort of self-contradicted myself there now, haven't I? But now, lo and behold, our scientists are telling us that the moon is within the atmosphere. Thank you, scientists. You've just solved my dilemma. The moon is in an era of such noble gases that they cause it to glow at a different rate altogether. This is the first time I've even thought about this, to be honest. I never even thought how to apply that. But if there's some sort of atmospheric gases all the way up, just like that lady once said, turtles all the way down. But that was a bit of a joke statement, I think. But if it's atmosphere all the way up, that there is no necessarily firmament, this does really change the whole ballgame again. I was sort of thinking in the fact that the moon might even be egg-shaped, kind of like that, which is why it's, always going around above us with the heavy end at the bottom, but when the sun hits it on the full moon side, the light just goes straight through it and totally illuminates the bottom, because that's the lit side. But the other side, being the dark side, when it's that side of the sun, the light doesn't come through it at all. That's why we see nothing. Because obviously with the moon being so high, we can only ever see the bottom side. So this adds a whole new equation to what the moon may actually be. But let's just go back to the conventional idea of it being lit by the sun, as I was always saying. Still works, even if it is in the atmosphere, because it comes up after the full moon the next night, an hour later. As you go out walking your dog again, you say, where's the moon, where's the moon? And as you're coming back, turn around and you go, oh, there it is. It's, well, it's still full-ish, but it's not quite full. And then each night, it's now an hour later, basically, and less and less and less, and hour, until eventually, no moon through the night, and you can look at the stars beautifully all night long. So the moon phases then are working basically like, if here's the sun and they're going opposite each other on the full moon phase, an hour later, well, let's just make it simple. The lit side is always facing the sun, because that's the source of light that illuminates it, why it glows. But then the next day, because it comes up an hour later, the lit side is further away from us, closer to the sun, in respect to us from our perspective, and so therefore we only see less of the angular part lit. And this happens until the point where the sun is basically caught up with the moon, and the entire lit side is facing the sun, and therefore, because it's in the middle of the day, we can't see it at all. Now I'll go back a couple of phases. Let's go back to, say, a quarter moon phase in the middle of the day. Now you can see the quarter moon phase in the middle of the day because the lit side is bright enough to be able to shine through the noble gases, as I've mentioned, of the atmosphere, which are already glowing. So the unlit side, obviously not being bright enough, is hidden. And a lot of people are trying to say that we can see blue sky through the moon. And sorry guys, that's not what you're seeing at all. You're seeing blue sky in front of the moon. And while I think of it, I'm also going to say the same thing about people who say they see stars through the moon. I'm sorry, but no. You're seeing something, whether it be a star or whatever, in front of the moon, not through the moon. So you cannot see through the moon. It's only semi-opaque or semi-translucent, whichever way you want to call it. It's both the same thing. So that is why you can never see the unlit part of the moon through the daytime. But the lit part is bright enough to shine through those noble gases, which indicates just how close it really is. Because you can never see any of the stars at daytime, and I do not believe they are sunlit. None of them. Not even the wandering stars. So I'll have to go into stars on another day. That's the next thing. But we got to figure out the moon, because the moon is still going through so many contentious debates at the moment, and I keep having to explain it, but the phases are obviously logical because the moon takes the 50 minutes longer, just as the tides take 50 minutes longer. You know, I'm very tidally oriented. I know the tides. I spent years and years of surfing, living by a river, a tidal river. I know and understand the tides and how they work in relation to the moon. I do not say that the moon pulls them around though with gravity or its attraction of mass. Absolutely not. It's completely opposite from that. It's got nothing to do with pull. To say they pull tides is like saying, you know, put your hands in the lake or a river or the bathtub and like this, pull the water to you, drag it to you. You cannot pull water. You can pull the body that it's in, but what you can do is repel water. If you put a big fan on it, you can repel the water and push it. So if there's some other force, an electromagnetic force, that only works on salt water, repelling the water and pushing it in front of it, as I have seen the tides always doing with the approaching moon, that could explain how we get the tides in tune with the moon. How we still get 2 tides per day with the one moon, still slightly mysterious, but we still do have a sun as well, and if it works on the same effect, but it still doesn't work exactly for me. It's still something I'm working on, because the tides basically were 6 hours 15 minutes apart, which works out, you know, to be basically that 15 minutes per day. So if we said it was an hour per day and the tides are 15 minutes, or they were actually 12 minutes apart per day, so the 50 minutes works out quite well there. But there's still only one moon that we can see. Something worth bearing in mind when it comes to Rahu. Anyway, back to the phases, because the phases are what we see and observe. And so we can see and observe that within 2 weeks the moon goes from full to new, where the moon then becomes invisible. Then about a day, maybe it's 2 days, just after the new moon, as the sun is setting, we go into twilight, which we're getting close towards here. As we go into twilight, you can see this bright sliver of moon. All of a sudden you go like, where was that? How come I couldn't see it? It's because the daylight is so bright. You have to look really closely and really look for it to be able to actually see it. But as soon as the sun goes down a little bit, all of a sudden this bright, shiny sliver appears. And you go, oh wow, how beautiful is that? And then as it gets just a little bit darker, all of a sudden you can see the entire part of the unlit moon. Now when I say unlit, it does make me think, is it does seem to be ever so slightly glowing. So now if the rest of the moon, when we can only see that tiny sliver, is still facing the sun and getting lit by it, are we actually seeing that dark side of the moon through the moon itself? You know, is that how come we can see it? Because you certainly can't see it in daylight, because it's way too dim. And so the only window of opportunity for those first couple of days after the new moon to see that sliver at that time of day, where you can see the entire moon, unlit part. And it kind of does lend itself to the idea that it is semi-opaque, semi-translucent, and we are actually able to see through it. So there is potential that maybe during a half moon, if the bright star was behind it, you may be able to see through the moon. But it doesn't mean that the moon's not there. It just means that it's semi-opaque, semi-translucent. I think I've really addressed as much as I feel like today. I know there's more. Moon phases, seasons, perspective. I could probably open up just one comment. Oh, that's going to take a bit of bother. It's going to take a lot of bother actually, because some people are just rude. But that video is unavailable. Wow. Somebody calls himself foot in mouth. So you can only see one bloody comment at a time. If I wanted to say view 359 replies, it'll take me 10 minutes to put them all through. But foot and mouth, edited, and it says, at toss catcher. Was the money to your fiancé for services rendered? Well, this is the sort of things I have to deal with on a daily basis. This is on the comment pinned by Flat Earth. Fight the Flat Earth. What's your name again? Craig McNeil? Oh, hang on. Quag McNeil. Let me get it right. Yeah, if I was to view, there is some in there I really like to address. I'll have to do that on another video, I think, because it's going to take me 3 hours just to scroll through them to find the ones. And I know that there was heaps more that I was going to talk about to do with perspective. I think I've covered enough. The thing is with perspective, you either get it or you don't. And if you don't, spend more time outside and look. The best way you can look and observe and see why perspective is personal to the viewer. Why does the sun get obscured by the distant objects on the obscurity point? Is to, as you're driving, every tree or vehicle or building, becomes a new local obscurity point. You know, everything that blocks your view further is obviously an obscurity point. And when you can see across a really long distance, the obscurity point is what we just come to call the horizon. But it's nothing more than an obscurity point. They're all obscurity points. Everything is an obscurity point that obscures your ability to see further. And it's because of your viewing height. Like if you stayed at the same height and went above that tree, you'd see further. You went above that building, you'd see further. But because they're there in front of you, they're an obscurity point, just like everything in front of you is in reality. Just even as water does. And you know for a fact that water is below your feet level. You know that for a fact. Even if you think you live on a spinning ball, you can't imagine that the water rises up to your eye level before it starts curving down again. Surely not. Surely you're not that stupid. Who on earth is that stupid to think that water will rise up before sinking down again or curving down, curving away? You know, if you believe you live on a ball, a curvy spinning water ball, whatever you think it is, you have to believe that the water must be curving away immediately from your perspective. Not rising up first, not continuing to rise up as you rise up. You know, the golf ball dimple world. You have to believe, you have to convince yourself that it must be sinking away immediately further down. Otherwise, why would there be a water obscurity point at all? How could there be a water obscurity point? You're calling that curvature. That means you're believing you're living under the curve of water. So you're not on top of the world. So everybody's living in a land down under. You know, apply some logical thought to that. And I look forward to seeing you in the comments. I look forward to seeing you on some live debates again, because there's lots more obviously I've forgotten. I took no notes, I just ad-libbed, and that's me. Over and out. See ya.